Hi guys, welcome back to Planet Mithril. My name is Mithril, and today I have part 2 of my Dragon Emperor of Rune tutorial, the much more intimidating and much more in-depth Palanquin. Now I want my Palanquin to be a real feature on the tabletop, drawing the eye in with rich colours, vibrant golds and reds, all offset by velvety purples and tones which truly befit that of an emperor. Now I haven't broken this video down into individual sections, as I personally found it easier to finish each individual area before moving on to the next. Also, you'll probably find that it's a hell of a lot easier to paint this in sub-assembly, but if you're like me, you just wanted to build the cool toy, so now you can suffer with me in this tutorial designed for you. I've primed my Palanquin with Chaos Black Spray prior to painting. Brush is ready guys, let's get painting. I'm beginning by giving the main body of the Palanquin, all the red wood, a solid base coat using a 3:1 mix of Mephiston Red and Rhinox Hide. The addition of Rhinox just helps the Mephiston cover slightly better and gives a more realistic tone to build up my wood grain off later on. Make sure to get all around the various planks and sections of the structure, spending a bit of extra time to get all within the texture of the trestling. This will take some time, but it pays here to be super thorough. Trust me, you do not want to have missed a section later on down the line. It's worth mentioning here as well, I'm painting the hanging cloths panels at the top with the same colours as well. I'm going over again now, this time applying a layer over all the wood using pure Mephiston Red. Now you can see that I'm applying this in semi-thick lines down the length of all the panelling and planking to build in initial guidelines for my wood grain texture. You can apply this as an edge layer if you prefer. I personally thought this would look more visually impactful when the model's finished. Now with the trestling you might find it easier to mask off the frame around the outside and hit it with a targeted spray of Mephiston Red to get better coverage. Just be careful not to be too heavy handed and let paint dry within the holes. This is an absolute pain to sort out later on, just trust me on that. I'm building up the wood grain texture and the hanging cloth over the Palanquin now using a 1:1 mix of Mephiston Red and Wild Rider Red. I'm basically just going back over the guideline texture already in place, but keeping my application finer and a bit more targeted. Don't be afraid to reorient your model to get the best angle as you work across. I've also found it easier to start at a specific point and work the same way around at every stage. This way you minimise the risk of missing a section as it just starts to become muscle memory. I'm building the wood grain texture, detailing up to an initial highlight using pure Wild Rider Red. With each progressive stage, keeping my application tighter and more controlled. It's at these upper levels where you'll really start seeing the wood grain texture coming together over the surface of the Palanquin. For the final extreme edge highlights over the wood and cloth, I'm adding in Screaming Skull to the Wild Rider Red. How much or how little depends ultimately how much you want to push the upper texture of the grain here. Ideally you're looking to just accentuate the larger detailed areas just to make them pop that little bit more, not necessarily applying this all over the main structure in its entirety. That said, the amount of skull added is entirely down to your preference here. Finally, when you're happy with how your Palanquin reds are looking, it's time to apply a glaze to the entire thing now with some heavily diluted Carroburg Crimson. This will just serve to tie together and unify the wood grain effect once it dries. You'll be glad to know there's only one more headache-inducing section left to finish. As you can see here, now all my red is finished, I've gone back over and rebased any areas which got red on them again using Abaddon Black, ready for the following stages. Right, now it's on to all the gold detailing, the second main part of this model which will really help tie things together. To begin with, I'm applying a coat of Rhinox hide to every part I intend to paint gold. This will just help the coverage of the gold and help it maintain a much stronger tone once it dries. These areas include all the trims, the runish symbol on top, metallic panels, fastenings and any other parts you feel could benefit from a hit of gold. Now it goes without saying that I want my Palanquin golds to mirror my Iselin golds as best I can. I'm inlaying my initial gold tones using Balthazar gold, being as targeted as possible here to avoid bleeding out onto the finished red. Honestly, there's no real ideal way to tackle this model, so you're gonna pretty much be constantly on edge. I certainly was, but just take your time and you'll be absolutely fine. I'm hitting all the gold now with a shade of Druchii Violet to bring out the burnished undertones of the Balthazar, making sure I have good control of the runoff of the shade as I go. With this now dry, I'm going to apply a targeted layer using Liberator Gold, drawing this towards the edges and vertices of the gold trim, leaving the Balthazar showing underneath where I can. Longer unbroken line work here will help give you the best overall look once this is in place. A second shade now is being applied using diluted Seraphim Sepia to bring some vibrancy back to the tone of the gold. Finally, an extreme edge highlight is being applied using Stormhose Silver, keeping this super targeted to keep the blend from the darker golds through to the lighter edges as strong and consistent as possible. Finally, a glaze is being applied using heavily diluted Cassandora Yellow. Now we can finally get onto the parts of this model which won't make you want to tear your hair out. The two large dragon statues and the smaller statues overhead are being base coated with a 3:1 mix of Abaddon Black and Incubi Darkness. The addition of Incubi in this base coat will help reinforce a shiny obsidian look to the statues as we highlight them up. I'm increasing this to a 50-50 split between Incubi Darkness and Abaddon Black for an initial blocking layer, defining the musculature and larger sections of the dragons whilst also defining their snarling faces and the spiral texture of their horns. It is now being given a shade using some Druchii Violet, pushing this into all the recesses, drawing it away from the larger, flatter surfaces like their backs. I'm going to be adding some Deepkin flesh into the previous mix now at a rough 2:1 ratio for the initial highlight stage. Keeping the Deepkin additions on the lower end to begin with, you can see I'm being a bit more targeted than I would normally be with a stage 1 highlight. This again is to try and reinforce the shiny, sleek texture of an obsidian statue and the light glinting off of it. I'm adding more Deepkin flesh into the mix for a final extreme highlight, focusing more on where the light will be hitting the surface more prominently. Finally, these are all being given a glaze using some heavily diluted Drakenhof Nightshade. The throne at the back of the palanquin now is being picked out using dryad bark. Would this have been easier to paint separately? Yes, of course. Was that going to happen? Absolutely not. I'm now applying a highlight to the edges of the throne using Gawthor Brown. seat cushion now I'm picking out using corn red. This is getting a shade using some diluted Carroburg crimson. Now I'm layering up the seat cushion with Screamer Pink, letting the Carroburg sit in the recessed creases. And finally, a highlight to the upper areas of the seat cushions being applied with a 2-to-1 mix of Screamer Pink and Screaming Skull. That's a lot of screaming over a highlight. The long trailing cloth that runs down the length of the palanquin and down the stairs now is being base coated using Naggaroth Night. This will match the spot colours used for the Dragon Emperor and help tie the model together in its entirety. I'm layering this up now using Fennican Purple, trying to leave the Naggaroth in the recesses where I can. Now the texture over this section is quite shallow, so you probably won't be able to draw out too much detail at this pre-shade stage. Now I'm applying a shade using some diluted Drucci Violet. As I said, the texture is quite shallow here, so it's important to break up any pooling to avoid any unsightly blemishes as the shade dries. I'm now highlighting the purple cloth with a 3-to-1 mix of Fennican Purple and Dawn Yellow. This will desaturate the vibrancy of the purple slightly and give more of a velvety look to the trailing cloth, which is very fitting for a manifestation. I'm continuing to add more Dawn Yellow into the mix and build up the upper highlights over the creases and edges of the trailing purple cloth. The tassels hanging off the front and back of the palanquin I'm now picking out using 'Rakarth' 'Rakarth' 'Flesh'. and then hitting these with a quick targeted shade using Palanquin Flesh Shade. This is being layered now using Screaming Skull. And finally, dry brush highlighted using Pallid Witch Flesh. Any extra silver details now, namely the pole for the eye atop the roof and the bars that anchor the purple cloth in place down the stairs, are being carefully picked out using Lip Belcher. These are now being given a quick targeted shade using Nuln Oil. And when these are dry, edge highlighted using Stormhost Silver. Wow, what a model. One I've genuinely been intimidated by for such a long time, and one that I'm glad to finally be able to share with you all now. Now, as you can see, the black dragons holding up the palanquin here are in fact finished, and my black dragon emperor also has a few extra banners, some extra crocodile detailing over the surface of the palanquin. Why aren't they in this video, I hear you ask? Well, it's in the interest of this video not being 45 minutes long. That's far too much time you need to spend listening to my voice. And also, as their paint scheme is pretty much exactly the same to that of the Dragon Emperor himself. The cloth of the banner and the Easterling Black Dragons matches that of the Dragon Emperor, and the gold used across the surface of the banners, the dragon statues on the side there that I've added, and the main armour of the Black Dragons also matches that of the Dragon Emperor. So you can use this to paint up the bearers of the palanquin and any extra banners over it to keep everything looking uniform and ruthlessly Easterling-y. For basing tips, please head over and check out my 5-minute bases playlist. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and hit that bell to make sure you never miss a Mithril upload. Thank you so much to all of our patrons who help keep the lights on here at Mithril Towers and continue to support us. You can support us for as little as £1 a month over on the Planet Mithril Patreon page, but the next tier up gets you access to a host of awesome online resources dutifully put together by Mrs. Mithril. Absolutely no pressure, but thank you guys so much for your continued support, and as always, take care and happy hobbying. Bye guys.